Hi, welcome to Detours Understanding Acquired Brain Injury. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about traumatic brain injury and intelligence testing. Um, Now, there are a variety of different psychometric assessments. Now, when I talk about psychometric assessments, what I'm talking about is different kinds of standardized tests that can be used in testing for different disabilities and problems associated with acquired brain injury. The thing is, many of these tests that are used to look for disabilities and problems. Many of them were originally developed for other purposes, especially like many of the neuropsychological instruments. Although, obviously, when they were developed, there was some thought, especially of the newer instruments, for how they could be applied otherwise. Now, intelligence testing has a long history. The original work was done in France and the United Kingdom initially, the initial thoughts, and in Germany as well. First of all, I want to show you a picture here of this is Wilhelm Wundt. He is considered the father of modern psychology. He developed the first, specifically of experimental psychology, he developed the first psychology lab, and picture here. And he was originally a physician, and he was interested in whether certain psychological traits, behaviors, things like that, could be measured. He was also kind of father of psychometrics, use of psychological testing and statistics to measure certain traits and attributes and things like that. He felt that an empirical means should be applied in looking at behavior and other attributes of human thought, feelings, things like that, because before then it was a lot more descriptive, things like that. And it's a lot of his original work which led to the development of the science of psychology. And what makes psychology a science is the fact that we do use statistical analysis and that we use the scientific method. And that's what makes anything a science. Now, I know there are the pure scientists, the biologists, the chemists, and the physicists who would throw rocks and say, oh, it's not a real science. Yeah. Scientific method is what makes something a science. Sticking to, of course, there are different types of scientific ways of looking at something, nerd alert. But that really is what makes the difference. So let's talk a little bit about intelligence testing. It has at best, a checkered history. Initially, it was more, considered for trying to understand, what is intelligence, a lot of the initial work. But later, it was used as a basis to deny people their rights. It was used for locking folks up in institutions. It was used for stratification within different large organizations. It was used for a lot of horrible things, sterilization, involuntary sterilization, and not just here in the United States, although we were definitely one of the ones that were bought wholesale into eugenics, which is belief that only certain people should breed, and the best should breed with the best. Of course, whatever the hell that means, God only knows. Galton and some of the other names that are more notorious, and this can be a very dark place to go. So we'll stay away from this for now. I mean, at some point later, we may not talk about this. And so, yeah, there's definitely dark elements to intelligence testing. But the problem is, how do you define it? How do you define intelligence in the first place? Later on, we did start to see that intelligence testing was more focused, and especially the early ones, the early attempts were made for school stratification for kids to find out which kind of classes would be more helpful. And it has, kind of stayed with that, but it also had those other purposes. Like I said, I want to avoid wandering down that dark path. So, first, some of the early experimental psychologists, and this is not one we can blame on the psychologists. This belongs to the psychologists, this problem. But so some of the early ones were familiar with the Stanford-Binet test, or Binet-Stone. The Stanford-Binet test was one of the earliest ones to come to the United States, but it was originally developed, obviously, with the Binet in there. You can tell the test was originally developed in France, and Dr. Binet had made some proposals as to how intelligence should be both ranked, and he used some of the earlier works that were done regarding mental age. And this is where the idea of IQ comes from. IQ stands for intelligence quotient. It was a fraction. And based on correct answers of an instrument, they would calculate a simple, this IQ score was mental age over chronological age. So this test derived a mental age of somebody and then put it over their chronological age. And this was when it was mainly meant for kids, school-age kids, because obviously, if your mental age is, say, 20 and you're 10, it's like, yeah. But what happens, when you reach 20? Your mental age doesn't continue to go up. So what's an 80-year-old? I wouldn't think that an 80-year-old is like... kind of goes down. So there were some problems, but we still use the word IQ score, intelligence quotient, but it really isn't a quotient anymore. Instead, we use the bell curve, and because what we do is we will gather a large statistical sample, and this is why I probably will have to do a huge nerd course discussing this, but basically what we do is we will gather and we will do a statistical sampling of how people do on a series of sub-tests meant to measure a bunch of different aspects of what the test designers and test editors consider to be aspects of verbal, which is one of the areas that they test, major areas that they test, of verbal intelligence, and then of depending on which of the instruments we're using, performance intelligence. So really, we're looking at one's ability to handle language, linguistic thinking, verbal abstraction, and the subtests have a variety of different names. As I said, I don't want to jump too deeply, but we will when we get into psychometrics, into the subtests and all the different parts used, if you want to get into that huge nerd alert, but we will, I promise. And then there's performance, PIQ. This all is part of the Wechsler Intelligence Scale. This guy. In 1955, he developed the first one of these. And we use, there are a variety of different types of Wechsler Intelligence Scales. And so these are computed on a large percentage of people, and they gather about the mean. Oh God. All right, well, let's just say that a certain percentage of people, the largest number, we will give that grouping who performs at a certain level on all the different subtests, and we will transform statistically. Yeah, this is going to take some very nerdy explanation. Statistically transform the performance of those individuals' performance, and we'll talk about how that will gather about the mean. Here is a bell curve showing IQ, okay? Those people who represent the 33% on either side, here, 32.5 on either side, represent the majority of the population, obviously, but that is the mean, average. Think about taking tests in school, okay? They are your average. And depending on how you score in those subtests, you'll get your raw score, and then you will get your transformed score. you will get then different scores on the smaller tests that make up the whole. Majority of people obviously score where the average distribution on the bell curve is. It's kind of like a grade of a C, right? Same idea. So now, depending on how you do and what strengths and weaknesses, things like that, within those domains, you will land on either side. Now, we use different sets of terminology in psychology. Thing is, you'll hear from different people, oh, I'm a genius or whatever. Bzzzt. We do not use that term in clinical psychology, in neuropsychology. That is not a term used in psych. That is a pop psych. That is a term you get off some crappy app in testing. Not valid. We'll get into validity and reliability too. Yeah. Maybe putting the cart before the horse here. But basically, genius, when it was used, genius, near genius was used in the earliest days of what was called the Terman study. This guy. He was doing a research for schools, academic performance. And he wanted to see those who scored above 140. IQ testing for, the modern intelligence testing, you have what are called standard deviations from the mean, meaning that a certain percentage will be offset. I'm not going to get into detail statistically here, but a certain percentage away from the average will be a standard deviation. 115 deviates to the right and 85 to the left. Positive or negative standard deviation 1. And that's depending on the number of people sampled, depending on how that distribution falls. In IQ testing, it's 13.5% off of the mean. And so this tells you basically what percentage you are of the population above or below. Now, at 115, we would call this bright. And it's really where we start to say, that somebody is intelligent. 115. We'll use the term, bright. Or even it's like where you might start to use the words mildly gifted. So, if your score's in, above 115 on, yeah, we'll say somebody is smart here, bright. It's an arbitrary kind of thing because it's less frequent, and really that's what this is all about: is what percentage of the population lands where. It's a percentage calculation. It is a transformed percentage calculation. It's kind of like grades in a test. Like the line between like B minus, just like you'd say it's good. All right. So then on the other side, we use a term that's kind of dull normal to 85. The thing about this, the military has done research, and below 85 is about the limit where you can do really pretty much any occupational thing. And the problem is that as we're beginning to become more dependent on computers and technology, that line is actually is approaching the mean. It's coming up. It's headed towards the average. It's not there yet. And to make matters worse, if you were to look at older IQ tests, the average American IQ is beginning to deviate towards the left. That's a problem because the cognitive demands are moving right for minimal performance, and the mean is moving to the left. Now, obviously, what we're going to do is, at least as far as the test is concerned, we're going to renorm it. So recompute where the average is, and we'll adjust it towards the mean, the 100. But it does not change the demands. All that will happen then is that we will say at this number, probably recompute it for 85, but fewer people will be able to meet the demands. This is a problem, and I'm not sure how we're going to fix it. More automation, perhaps? More computer assistance? The interval will probably grow also. All right, anyway, so back to the right side. A lot of people with acquired brain injury, we do fall to the right. As I said, 115. About 115 on the current distribution is such that you have a lot of options open. Here is a scale for the different occupations, right? And like clerical teaching, are around 115. Managers 118. Cashiers. You would think, would it need to be that high? Yeah. Especially with increasing sophistication, things like that. Accountants, approaching like 120, give or take. School teachers need to be above 120. 120 is an interesting break point. 120 is the line for what's called superior. Because some school districts use 120 as the line for giftedness. Giftedness is not a term that is used in psychology. Giftedness is an educational term, okay? Giftedness refers to, gifted and talented technically. Giftedness refers to capacity to perform better than the majority of students academically. Most people confuse the idea of genius with giftedness. They are two different concepts. Genius refers more to the ability to be completely transformative. And that's more of like a term of art. Again, it's a pop sci kind of like, but generally when applying that, you're talking about people who completely transform. Albert Einstein, for example, his intelligence, high, estimated beyond probably 160, 170, something like that, way up high. But IQ is not the only component. It's creativity, insightfulness, the ability to, look beyond and ask the right questions. It was because he could ask the right questions and think in a different way from everybody else. And that does not come with IQ, and that is not tested in IQ tests. Again, when we get into psychometrics and assessments and stuff, we'll talk more about like what doesn't get measured by the intelligence test. And we'll be talking about its applications. So yeah, that's different. But giftedness is a school term, really. It is something that is used by the educational system, and really one of the things for which intelligence testing is meant. Okay, so back to IQ testing. And us, brain injury. Your typical nurse needs to be about 119, 120. That would include your LPNs, your RNs, BSNs. And again, you're that superior range, right? That is the break point where you can, with differing amounts of effort, do pretty much any job you want. Obviously, and this is important to know also, there is a what's called a standard error of measure bar. Sorry about the size. It's like when I realized it's like, should I maybe have done the nerd video first? Basically, what a standard error of measure bar means is that with testing like this, IQ testing and otherwise, you need to account for the fact that when you repeat a test, people's performance will differ. And that when we give a full-scale IQ score, if I were to give it to you 5 hours from now, 5 days from now, 5 years from now, your score will be different. And it will fall in different places. Even if nothing significant has changed about, like even if you haven't had a head injury, for a variety of different reasons. We'll get into those later. And that heritability is only a small part of it when you're a kid. It's less than 50% of the influence. When you're an adult, yeah, it's reflected by genetics. And heritability between individual parents, biological parents, is less than 1/4 when you're a kid. Yes, I will get into that too. But it's basically there's a change. So if they say like your school teacher needing 121, whatever, some can do the job perfectly fine with an IQ of 112, 108. Others, to do the job, need to score like 130. And it depends on where, what type of teaching, what subject, all kinds of things. Nursing. They're saying like 119, 120. Depends on the type. Are you doing, some basic, some of the, like maybe simple home care kind of stuff, and not really doing, you're just like changing a simple bandage and just checking on, or are you doing intensive care? Are you doing ICU nursing where you've got like 6 pumps going, you've got all kinds of medications, you've got where we're nurse practitioner kind of stuff, high level, huge error bar, and location and levels of responsibility. Are you a senior? Again, monster error bars. So standard error of measure. And so, for example, they say let's look at what they say for, take a look again, for, physicians and surgeons, 128. There's a big error bar there. Some docs do it, can perform adequately, perform just fine, and their intelligence is in the, 1 teens, below 115, below what you would call bright. Some have, an IQ of 180s. And the monster difference is what the demands are, what the situation is. Is it, little old Doc Jones who just, checks on Mimo's feet and, gives her pills? Or is it, doctor, professor, sir, whatever, who's, the world leading research on this one unique disease that he or she discovered and, is has published 1 million articles and 1 million books. So these are the kind of problems that we have when it comes to like intelligence and like how it lines up with testing and all this other stuff. There's a lot of like nuance, and it's a big part of why training in neuropsychology is long and extensive. It takes as long to become a neuropsychologist as it does to become a fully board certified neurologist, because learning all these kind of things. And so now looking back to this again, where we're looking at where you land on average, it's also important to remember that, again, IQ testing does not capture every component of what is necessary. Social skills, ability to communicate, executive dysfunction, things like that. High IQ and TBI. Research shows that those of us with traumatic brain injury, while we may lose some, we can lose a bunch of points depending on what aspects we do well on in the subtests and things. If it's processing speed and like certain things, yeah, it can affect our performance. Not to mention aging. our brains change. We shrink as we get older. And if we've had other experiences that have altered our performance, yeah, your IQ can go down. And it does over time. You lose what's called fluid intelligence, which is that, again, that how quick you are, processing speed, those nonverbal components, the PIQ portion. Also, it seems as though the right cerebellum has some kind of influence over there, and that shrinks in size also. But more what influences our intelligence is the ability to apply it. Dysexecutive syndrome, adult ADD, ADHD, basically. Psych said we can't describe something as adult onset ADD, ADHD, so we call it dysexecutive syndrome out of the neuro community. Oh, well, whatever. So there are those things that affect. And the evidence is that while it's true that IQ score does reflect how you perform in school, that is what it was designed for after all, and it does, to a degree, a fair degree, reflect general success in occupation. Like, will you land the job you want? Again, that's kind of what it was designed for, especially for the adult version. Particulars. No. And does it show overall, like, how successful, remembered in life, blah, blah, blah? No. It measures what it was designed to do, because it was designed to do that. I mean, you know. And people with brain injury, it's more complicated than that. So, almost a 30-minute video for me to say, it's more complicated than that. IQ is definitely part, and a useful part, of measuring how we're doing effects of brain injury and to understand the workings of the mind. But IQ testing, to be honest with you, is more useful in brain injury to determine areas of our brain that are working and not working. Processing speed, abstract functioning, ability to generate ideas, to see connections. It's more useful as a assessment of cognitive function. It's more useful as a neuropsych battery than it is as a measurement of awesomeness. Okay? General, like, it may be fine to boast on social media, to whatever, but the fact of the matter is, in the end, you may as well talk about your Woodcock-Johnson achievement scores, or how you scored on the Luria, Nebraska, or whether you beat the Wisconsin card sort test, because that is a bastard of a test, by the way. That's this one. Those of you who know that horrible test, or the Stroop test, if you got a good score on that and don't know how the test works, that is something to brag about, brain injury-wise. But honestly, the IQ score, well, it is something to say, hey, but seriously, honestly, yeah. If you're a kid, yes, it does point towards the potential for success academically, a good academic career, and that you've got the voltage that it takes to succeed in school. Yes. And as far as, like, to land a job that, you like, does it point to success in that job? That's not so definitive. A lot of other factors apply. So that maybe not, but do well in school, be able to land the kind of job you want, yeah. Anything outside of that, yeah. I promise we will get into details when I do statistics and psychometrics. I also promise you that unless you're a huge nerd, yeah. But it is interesting. I find it interesting, but beware, things that I find interesting get. All right, so there are, in that thing, I'm going to talk about how we figure out what your intelligence is before you were hurt. And yes, there are ways to do that, which are actually pretty effective. But again, that's going to be diving in the weeds. I'm going to be talking in that section about different neuropsychological instruments and stuff like that. But that's going to be a bit sticky too. but I want to talk about like the Lurie, Nebraska, show some of the instruments that we use to assess, and what they help, what they show, what they don't show. Talk about twice exceptionality. Adults and kids who have like attention deficit disorder and who have problems with learning disabilities, things like that, and who also are gifted, and a lot of their symptoms, and people with traumatic brain injury, and how that all kind of interacts with each other. Some of you may recognize yourself, but this stuff gets, like I said, highly nerdy, and so I just want to give you that warning. All right, so if you found this interesting, please click like and subscribe, and yeah, it's going to get weird, so I do suggest you buckle up for a very strange ride when I get into psychometrics and statistics. Those of you who like aren't that much into that kind of thing, and I promise the math will be simple. Okay, promise. Maybe if I can avoid it altogether, I will, but probably not completely. So I promise I'll make it as simple as I can. And by the way, any students who happen to watch this, it's not a substitute for your stats course, but it is a lot of fun. Bye. Oh, please click like and subscribe, and if you have any comments below, please comments below for me, any questions, anything like that, any of the other co-hosts. Click on the bell icon and like that kind of stuff. Yeah. So yeah, of course I would do this on the one about IQ. Yeah, sense of humor is important too. So yeah, so please click like and subscribe. Please hit the bell icon and any comments below, and share and all that stuff.